Dang, Q got, aggressive. Hello, interwebs! It is time for my review of the second episode of the second season of Star Trek Picard, this one titled Penance. And because the trial never ends, I'm going to give you my spoiler-free thoughts up front, and then we're going to get into spoilers in the back. So, staying spoiler-free, whoo boy, this was a really fun episode. Whoo boy, this was a ton of fun as an episode. Without getting too directly into spoilers, I think basically this episode is kind of exactly what you assumed it was going to be based off of what happened at the end of the premiere of the season, as well as basically from all the trailers that we got leading into season 2, in that this was kind of a mirror universe-esque kind of fascist episode where all of our characters are sort of like, what's going on? What's happening? This doesn't seem right. Everyone's evil here. It's not a good thing. And I think that's probably the biggest knock that I can give the episode, in that there's nothing really all that surprising that happens within this if you'd already seen the trailers for season 2. Like, pretty much every single beat that the trailers alluded to happens here. And on one hand, that is a bit disappointing because it doesn't exactly bring with it any surprises along the way in that aspect. But on the other hand, I'm kind of again glad that we're getting rid of all this sort of stuff that we sort of presumed was going to happen very early. Because after this point, I really don't have much of an idea outside of like where we're heading directly next of what's going to happen from here. So this is again a little bit more of the place setting pieces of this story so far, but it is sort of getting through it in a fun way. That being said though, even though the plot of this wasn't particularly revelatory, what it does do is, one, set the stakes for the story going forward, and number two, also allows our characters to have a lot of really fun moments as well. The interplay and the fun of all the characters sort of figuring themselves out in this world was a true joy to see, and I think probably my biggest plus to this episode was how smartly all the characters sort of figured out what was going on and played off of that, because I feel like quite often, especially in Star Trek, not always in Star Trek, like other science fiction shows do this as well, but I feel like especially in Star Trek, when characters are thrust into these alternate universes or like weird things going on types of stories, it takes a little bit of time for the characters to like get smart and get caught up on what's going on. Like I can think of like several episodes of like Star Trek Voyager. I think there was like an early season 2 or season 1 episode where like Ensign Kim was thrust back into an alternate history version where he was back on Earth, and he was like, took forever. He's like, what's going on? This is weird. This is so strange. But in this episode, like, characters pick up like very quickly. To give you one very brief little example of this, Seven calls Rios, who both are aware that they're in some sort of weird alternate timeline, and Seven plays it safe at first because she doesn't actually know if Rios is the Rios that she knows from her version of reality. And there's this kind of nice little moment where they test the waters. And I thought, again, it was just, that was very smart, and I like that they pick up on being very careful and safe throughout here, and very smart. And there's a couple slip-ups here and there, but the characters just, again, pick up very quickly. Even Picard, you know, 7 of 9, Rios, like all of them just instantly start playing their roles and know what to do, which, given that this sort of weird shenanigans sort of happens all the time in the Star Trek universe, I'm surprised that it like took this long for characters to actually display that. I feel like there should be a class at Starfleet Academy where it's like, all right, if you get stuck in an alternate universe, this is what you do. And like some poor cadet raises their hands like, how often does this happen? And the teacher being like, believe me, more often than you would think. It's just, I just really enjoyed that aspect of it. Even further though, while the main plot of this is fairly perfunctory, there are a little bit of hints and intrigues here that have me kind of very shocked and very excited and curious to see where this story is ultimately going. Mostly having to do with the first 10 minutes of the episode surrounding the character of Q. To talk about that more, I'll have to get into spoilers, but Q is a very different tone, I'll say, for the Q that we've always known, and it was honestly rather shocking to see, and has me very curious going forward. I'll just say it, he's a much angrier Q than we've seen before, and I won't go much further than that, but it just has me be like, something's going on here, and I'm very curious to see what role Q is ultimately going to play in all this, and what exactly is going on, because yes, there's some time travel stuff and alternate reality stuff going on here, but it seems to be alluding to something larger going on, so I'm ultimately very curious to see how that's all going to play out. The last two spoiler-free things that I'll say here is, again, Elnor isn't really given much to do this episode, and I know that that'll probably work itself out, but one of my biggest problems with Star Trek Picard Season 1 is that Elnor didn't have a lot to do in that season either, and in both the premiere and this episode, Elnor hasn't really done all that much, except for, like, beat people up a few times. And while I like his character, I hope that he gets a little bit more to do, because all the other characters have a lot to do throughout this episode and last episode. Here, Elnor is the one kind of getting shafted for the most part, and so I'm hoping that he gets to be brought back in a little bit further down the line. And then the second thing that I'll say here, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in the spoiler-filled section, but I'll say this here mostly because we have, this was revealed in the trailers, but the Borg Queen does show up in this episode. Again, that was in the trailer, so I don't feel like I'm spoiling too much saying that. And while I won't talk specifically about her plot function here, I was a little bit disappointed in her presence here, not even in how she's functioning in the story, which I think is perfectly fine, but I feel like there's a little bit of edge lost to her character. She seems kind of, like, boring, because I feel like what a lot of, like, Alice Krieg and even her appearances later on in Star Trek Voyager brought to the table was this, like, sexual edge to the character, this, like, I might fuck you or I might assimilate you feel to her character that is pretty much absent, at least in this episode with her, and it kind of makes her lose a little bit of her menace. And so I was a little bit disappointed in our initial impressions with the Borg Queen here. She kind of read a little bit flat to me and a lot less unique and intriguing and what made her a little bit special in her previous appearances. Maybe that's just me because I love the sexy, weird subversiveness of the character, but I did find her a little bit bland here. But maybe that'll change going forward because this is only her first appearance, and given the role she's playing here, she, of course, would be a bit more nullified either way. But we'll see how that plays out going further into the rest of the season. That all being said, that's all I can say with remaining spoiler-free. So, if you have not seen the episode yet, jump off here because we're about to dive in to spoilers. Alright, getting into spoilers, I feel like most of what I want to talk about happens right at the front of this episode, and that is with Q, because, there's something going on with Q here. He is pissed off at Picard. Starting at the beginning, though, I do love the Yesterday's Enterprise reference that we get at the beginning of this when Picard's asking about the Stargazer, and Q's like, Stargazer, how Yesterday's Enterprise of you, which works on many different levels. Number one, obviously Yesterday's Enterprise was the name of an episode, and obviously also refers to the fact that, like, Stargazer was the ship that Picard had before the Enterprise, but also Yesterday's Enterprise itself was presumably kind of an episode that this storyline is somewhat based upon, because that also featured an alternate universe where everything was a little bit more darker and militaristic, and Guinan played a role in that as well, as possibly she will play further on into this season. So that reference just worked on multiple different levels. It like literally worked, but also worked as sort of a fourth wall break as well. But I also loved, again, this interplay with Q and Picard, with Q saying, like, that it's never too late for us to be students of our own actions, and so many wrinkles, so many disappointments, again, alluding to this theme of aging and time that we have been getting throughout the first episode as well. But then when Picard, like, begs him to, like, don't do this, what are we doing here? Q just slaps Picard across the face. I was like, holy shit. Like, damn, that's what probably, of all the things that happens in this episode, that was the thing that shocked me the most. I was like, Q is angry about something, and I am curious to see, because on all the other appearances, we've had a menacing and scary Q before this, but we've never had him be outright aggressive towards Picard. I feel like that's almost beneath Q. So, as of right now, I'm intrigued by it. I hope it ultimately gets justified, because if it's just there for shock value, I'll be disappointed in the end. But if there's reasons behind that, as we kind of get hints to with Q, Picard sort of realizing that, Q, you are not well. References there. I'll be very curious to see where that's ultimately going. So I hope it's not done just for shock value, but that there is an actual character reason that Q is lashing out at Picard, especially in that line where he says, this is not a lesson, this is penance, where we get the name of the episode. And so I'm very curious that there's an allusion to the fact that Q seems to know or think that Picard knows what's going on here, that there is actually something that Picard knows that he should be paying penance for. And so I'm very curious to see how that ultimately is going to play out as the season goes forward. Well, what's the mystery here? Does Picard actually know what the reason for this is. A couple other things too is we also learned that this version of Jean-Luc in this version of reality is a dangerous general who has killed multiple of his enemies, including, in a few references here, Gul Dukat from Deep Space Nine, the main villain of Deep Space Nine. We get to see his skull. Hot dang. Also, we get to see Martok and Sarek Skull, two also prominent characters in the Star Trek universe. Martok, again, being the Klingon general who eventually becomes Chancellor in Deep Space Nine, and Sarek being Spock's father, very classically. So, dang, very intriguing there as well, and very dark to see their skulls on display in Chateau Picard. And there's also a few other Easter eggs, and I'm sure other people will find there. Like, we got a Jat Vash disruptor on Picard's wall, and I'm sure there are many numerous other Easter eggs that I'm sure people will comb through and find. But then Q leaves Picard, saying that you need to seek atonement, maybe forgiveness. But Picard sort of like going on with this. And then we get a scene where Picard sort of looking into his past, and we see this version of Picard in this universe is very much saying a human galaxy is a safe galaxy, or vice versa, I should say. And the more militaristic, fascist, and, human supremacist ideals of this version of reality. We also learned that Laris and Jaban were killed by Picard himself in this reality. And also, apparently, this version of Picard likes Colombian roast and not Earl Grey. I love that that's what get Picard to say, like, yeah, this is definitely Dante's Circle of Hell, for sure. It's Colombian roast, not Earl Grey. Though I'm sure Captain Janeway would have something to say about that. But then we learn that it is Eradication Day, and we jump over to 7 of 9, who is no longer Borgified, but is president of the Confederation. Interesting to see here. Her husband was just like doting around, like, hello, my dear, hello. I'm like, oh my god, I want to hit this guy myself. With how many times he just says, like, dear so perfunctorily. It was just kind of frustrating, to be honest. The other thing I will say about this is I do like Seven's reaction to this moment where she's like she does like tests of herself and like test her pain receptors and stuff like that. I thought that was a very like 7 of 9 way to react to this. However, one thing I do think is weird is doing a rewatch of Star Trek Voyager, I kind of got the impression that like 7 of 9's implants weren't just there. She actually did have like Borg elements of her still around. Like she could still sense things through her Borg implants. And so for them to be removed, I feel like kind of like an arm missing for her a little bit. So I hope that gets played up a little bit, that like there's a piece of her that feels missing because she doesn't have these Borg implants anymore that have been a part of her identity for so long. So I hope that that's not a sort of a glossed over superficial thing for her, but that's actually part of how she develops throughout the season. But then I like her sort of figuring out what's going on very quickly and calling Rios, which, by the way, we also get a little brief reference to General Sisko, who I would presume would be Benjamin Sisko here. Sadly, I doubt Avery Brooks is going to show up, but I do like the reference that Sisko is alive and presumably well and doing well for himself in this fascist timeline. But she contacts Rios, who's in charge of the Vulcan attack, and she calls him in to Earth to sort of bring Rios in on the action. Again, I liked, as I talked about in my Switherfield section, that 7 played it very smartly there, because she was like, well, this is a secure line, and if you want to say anything about weird, and then they realize they can sort of speak freely, and so I like that she played it very smart. It was a cool little bit there. Then we jump to Okinawa, where there's some bombings going on, and we learn that there are rebels fighting against this fascist regime, and that they're like lighting off different bombs for Cardassia and or different places like that, Vulcan. But then the rebels get stopped and kidnapped, but Raffi brings Elnor in, and it's also the Raffi that we know, and I like that she sort of pretends, again, very smartly, like takes on the roles like, we're going to bring this rebel in, we're going to bring him in, pretending to bring him into the president. Then we go and meet Jurati and her Patton Oswalt cat. So Patton Oswalt has now been, I believe, in both Star Wars and... Has he been in Star Wars? Well, anyways, Patton Oswalt's in Star Trek, which I'm all here for. Love Patton Oswalt. And he's like Jurati's cat, and I love Jurati at one point says, like, I'm mind-bogglingly lonely in any universe. And so I thought that was kind of fun. And I love Jurati just sort of being, like, not knowing what to do when 7 of 9 comes in, and she's sort of flustered and overspeaks. Like, yes, the Stargazer! I mean, yes, the Stargazer! Like, gazing at stars. And so I thought Jurati just played it fun. I'm liking that she's playing the more comic relief in this season. Last season, she kind of had a darker storyline to her, and so I like that she's playing a bit more of the comic relief here than she did last season, and I think she's playing it very, very well. But then we meet the Borg Queen, who is going to be executed on Eradication Day. And I already said my a little bit of disappointment with the Borg Queen here, but I do really like that she can sense sort of temporal echoes across time of herself. Something that was hinted to in some of the Star Trek, like, beta canon stuff in some of the books, but I don't think it was ever directly alluded to in any of the actual movies or TV shows, but is definitely alluded to in some of the books. So I like that element of beta canon being brought in here, that she senses something is wrong, and she senses that the time has been broken in some way, shape, or form, and calls on Seven of Nine to help her. She says, tertiary adjunct of Unimatrix 01, help me, and uses Seven of Nine's Borgified name to ask for help. But then we get but then all of our crew eventually meet up together. I love the fact that when Raffi learns that Seven of Nine is the president, she says, oh, she's going to wear that well, and also makes fun of her commitment issues now that she's married. This is the first scene that I think we've had with Seven and Raffi this season, so I'm hoping that the relationship gets developed a little bit more. Again, we had the audio drama that I did a review of that should be up there with these characters, but I would like to see a little bit more interaction within the season itself, so we'll see how that gets developed. But I like the little hints of that going on in the background here. But then I love that when they meet up and they sort of figure out their plan that we need to rescue the Borg Queen in order to escape this reality, that when they get confronted with Seven's husband, Girardi's pulls a story out of her butt very, very quickly. It's just very, very funny. Great deliveries, Seven of Nine drinks or whatever it was. It was just really, really greatly funny. I really enjoyed that whole bit. But then we get this sort of rock star execution thing with everyone's really into the execution going on. Apparently it's rock concerts in this fascist universe, and sort of Seven of Nine sort of trying to stall for time, and Picard's stalling for time in order to rescue the Borg Queen with Rios to get back, and so they can go back in time in order to try and fix whatever's gone wrong in this reality. As we learn that this isn't a new universe, it is a different version of this reality because of time travel. So they need to go back in time and use the Borg Queen in order to calculate that, because they don't have their own Spock. Though I feel like Seven of Nine is just as smart as Spock, right? Right? That's me. Is that just me? I feel like Spock is intelligent, one of the smartest characters in the Star Trek universe, but I feel like Seven's on par with him, or close to. I feel like she could calculate that. But that aside, so they need to rescue the Borg Queen in order to do that. And again, so they're stalling for time, and I like Picard getting trying to hype up the crowd and get everything. That was a lot of fun. But eventually Girardi gets them through, and they get rescued by Rios at the very last minute, and they start escaping to try and go into the past. But then Seven of Nine's husband appears on the ship, shoots Elnor, and tries to capture Picard, and that's where we are left off. So my presumption would be that they will escape pretty quickly in the beginning of next episode, and we will see them off into the past, because as we've seen in the trailers, they do make it to the 21st century, just 2 years from now. So curious to see how that's all going to play out. Again, I feel it's going to be fairly quick at the beginning of the next episode, so I'm not exactly too worried about it. I doubt this Seven's boring husband is going to take out Picard of all people. Also, it's worth mentioning too here that when they beam up to the ship, the Girardi sort of pushes the Borg Queen over and it's we're just going to push you off into the corner here. And also I love that her bickering with Rios earlier on in the episode was kind of funny. Was a good bit to reference the fact that they did date for a little bit of time back in season 1. But anyways, we also get little hints that the Borg Queen is interested in Girardi for some reason, that there's a connection between those two. So we'll see how that ultimately plays out in the long run of the season, that Girardi may have a darker side to her, as we kind of saw hinted at in season 1, that the Borg Queen may play off of. So curious to see how that's all going to play out going forward. Also, editing Jessie here, because I forgot to mention that the Borg Queen said that the change that happened to the timeline happened in 2024, which we kind of presumed from the trailer, but that there was a, quote, Watcher in the past, and they should seek the Watcher. So I'm very curious to see what they mean by Watcher. My guess is it's Guinan, that Guinan is going to be the character in the past, because we know that she would be on Earth around this time, given what we know from the episode Time's Arrow. But we shall ultimately see if that's going to be the case. Maybe it's someone else who is in the past. But if I had to put money down, my guess is that it's going to be Guinan, but we'll see. But that's pretty much my thoughts for this episode. A lot of fun. Again, plot-wise, nothing particularly surprising in the sense of where this ultimate plot was leading to, given what we already knew of the season going into it. But a very fun episode on its own terms. I enjoyed the subterfuge. I enjoyed the intelligence of the characters. And I loved the little tantalizing hints of future stuff, like what's going on with the Borg Queen and with Q. So some interesting stuff going on here on the whole. But I am very excited to see where it's going to go into the very next episode. But with all that said, thank you so much for watching. I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. But until next week, I will bid you adieu, and I hope that you all live long and prosper.